The town sat deep within the snowy mountains of Romania, isolated from the rest of the world. During winter, the streets became silent, long before midnight, and the locals avoided eye contact with strangers. When Adam arrived there for his travel documentary channel, he immediately noticed something strange about the place. No music. No laughter. Just cold wind moving through empty streets. At the center of the town stood an old building covered in snow and darkness, Hotel Vermilion. The hotel looked abandoned from the outside, but a dim light still glowed behind the reception desk. Adam stepped inside, dragging his suitcase across the wooden floor. The air smelled old and damp, like something had been rotting behind the walls for years. An elderly man sat behind the counter, staring at him without blinking. "I need a room for one night," Adam said. The old man remained silent for several seconds, before slowly reaching beneath the desk and placing a rusty key on the counter. "Room 307. Adam smiled awkwardly. "What's with the creepy room number? Is this place haunted or something?" The old man's expression never changed. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "After 3 a.m., do not open the door." Adam laughed nervously, assuming it was some local ghost story meant to scare tourists. He grabbed the key and headed upstairs. The third-floor hallway was unnaturally quiet. The wallpaper was peeling off the walls, and the lights flickered weakly above him. At the very end of the corridor stood room 307. The moment he stepped inside, a chill crawled through his body. The room itself looked ordinary: an old wooden bed, a dusty mirror, faded curtains, and a small bathroom in the corner. Snow tapped softly against the window, while icy wind whispered outside. Adam set up his camera and began recording for his channel. The first few hours passed normally. But around 2:30 a.m., he heard footsteps outside his door. Slow. Heavy. Thok. 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 The footsteps stopped, directly outside room 307. Silence followed. Adam frowned, and walked toward the door. He looked through the bottom gap beneath it. Nothing. Then suddenly, talk. 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 3 slow knocks. Hello. Adam called. No answer. He carefully unlocked the door, and pulled it open. The hallway was empty. But at the far end of the corridor, something stood in the darkness. A tall figure. Too tall to be human. Its head tilted slightly toward him, before it slowly disappeared into the shadows. Adam slammed the door shut, and locked it immediately. His heart pounded violently, inside his chest. When he checked the clock, it was 2:59 a.m. Then the lights began flickering. The bathroom faucet suddenly turned on by itself. Water dripped into the sink. Tip, tip, tip. Adam slowly approached the bathroom. The moment he looked into the mirror, his blood turned cold. Written across the fogged glass were the words, "Don't fall asleep." Adam stumbled backward, in terror. Then, "Teach okay." A sound came from beneath the bed. "Teach okay. Teach okay." Something was knocking from underneath him. His breathing became shaky. Every instinct told him to run, but fear rooted him to the floor. Slowly, he crouched down and aimed his phone flashlight under the bed. Nothing. Just darkness. Then his phone vibrated. A camera notification. His recording was still running. Confused, Adam opened the live camera feed and froze. On the screen, he could see himself standing beside the bed. But directly behind him stood another person. Tall, pale, smiling. Its face looked stretched, unnaturally wide. The thing slowly leaned closer, toward the back of Adam's head. Adam spun around, instantly. Nothing was there. Then a whisper came from beneath the bed. "He's not behind you." Adam looked downward. Two pale eyes opened, inside the darkness under the bed. A long arm suddenly shot out, and grabbed his ankle. Adam screamed, as the room lights exploded into darkness. The camera continued recording. The next morning, 3 weeks after Adam disappeared inside room 307, the story began spreading across online horror forums and paranormal communities. Most people believed it was fake, just another internet mystery created for views. But one detail disturbed everyone who watched the recovered footage. At the very end of the video, just before the screen cut to black, a voice could be heard whispering near the microphone. Not Adam's voice. Something else. It whispered, "He's still here." The footage was eventually removed from the internet, but copies continued appearing on strange websites late at night, before disappearing again hours later. One of the people who became obsessed with the case was a British paranormal investigator named Daniel Reeves. Unlike the internet detectives making theories online, Daniel had spent years investigating abandoned hospitals, haunted houses, and disappearances across Europe. He didn't believe in ghosts easily. But something about room 307 felt wrong. Especially after he noticed a hidden detail in Adam's footage. In one frame, just before the camera fell, the mirror inside the room reflected something impossible. The reflection showed the bed clearly, but there was no floor beneath it. only darkness. Daniel arrived in Romania during the middle of another brutal winter. Snowstorms buried most of the roads, and the town looked even more lifeless than before. The locals immediately became nervous when he mentioned Hotel Vermilion. An old woman at a nearby cafe grabbed his wrist tightly and whispered, "If you hear knocking after 3 a.m., pretend you are asleep." Before Daniel could ask more questions, she walked away. That night, he entered Hotel Vermilion. The same old receptionist sat behind the desk, waiting. "You came because of the American," the old man said quietly. Daniel stopped walking. "You know about him?" The old man stared at him for several seconds, before replying, "Room 307 does not let people leave." Daniel noticed something strange immediately. The key looked newer, as if someone had recently cleaned the blood off it. Unlike Adam, Daniel prepared carefully. He placed multiple cameras inside the room, audio recorders near the bed, and motion sensors around the walls. He even sprinkled powder across the floor to detect footprints during the night. At first, nothing happened. The room remained silent, too silent. Around 2:45 a.m., one of the cameras suddenly shut off by itself. Then another, then another. Daniel checked the equipment, but the batteries were still full. At exactly 3 a.m., every light inside room 307 flickered violently. The temperature dropped instantly, and Daniel's breath became visible in the freezing air. Then came the knocking. Talk. 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 This time, it didn't come from a hallway. It came from inside the walls. The sound moved slowly around the room, like something crawling behind the wallpaper. Talk. 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 Daniel forced himself to stay calm. He picked up his flashlight and followed the sound toward the bathroom. The mirror was covered in condensation again, but this time, the message was different. "Why did you come back?" Daniel stepped backward slowly. Then the motion sensor near the bed activated. Something was underneath it. The powder spread across the floor suddenly shifted by itself, as if invisible fingers were dragging across it. And then, a handprint appeared beneath the bed. Not human, too long, too thin. Daniel aimed his flashlight downward. At first, he saw nothing except darkness, then 2 eyes opened. Wide. Pale. Unblinking. The same eyes from Adam's footage. The creature smiled from the darkness beneath the bed, its mouth stretched wider and wider until the skin around its face began tearing open. Then it spoke in Adam's voice. "Help me." Daniel stumbled backward in horror. But the voice changed instantly. Now dozens of voices whispered together from underneath the bed. Men, women, children. Crying, begging, screaming. As if many people were trapped somewhere deep below the room. Suddenly, all the cameras inside room 307 turned back on at once. Every screen showed the same thing. Daniel standing alone in the room. Except, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a tall figure, touching the ceiling. Its arms were unnaturally long. Its skin looked gray and wet. And where its face should have been, there was only darkness. The thing slowly bent down toward Daniel's ear. Then every device inside the room screamed with deafening static. The hotel lights went out. And room 307 disappeared into darkness once again. The static screaming from the cameras continued for nearly 30 seconds. Before suddenly cutting into silence. Complete silence. Daniel couldn't move. The tall figure behind him no longer appeared on the camera screens, but he could still feel something, breathing, near the back of his neck. The air inside room 307 had become impossibly cold, cold enough to burn his skin. Then the emergency light above the hallway flickered on, for a single second, through the gap beneath the door. And Daniel saw something horrifying. Dozens of shadows, standing outside, motionless, waiting. The light disappeared again, instantly. Daniel grabbed his flashlight and backed toward the door, carefully, trying not to make noise. His hands shook violently, as he reached for the handle. Locked. He pulled harder. Still locked. Then a voice whispered, directly beside his ear, "Don't let them see you awake." Daniel spun around, nearly falling to the floor. Nobody was there. But the whisper sounded exactly like Adam. Suddenly, the knocking returned. Talk, talk, talk. This time it came from the bathroom door. Slowly, the bathroom light turned on, by itself. The mirror was no longer fogged. Instead, Daniel saw words, scratched directly into the glass, deep scratches, as if someone had carved them, using their fingernails. Look under the floor. Before Daniel could react, something slammed against the bathroom wall from the inside. The entire room shook. Another impact followed immediately. Boom. Boom. It sounded like something enormous was trapped inside the walls, trying to force its way out. Then came the screaming. Not one scream. Hundreds. Human voices crying in pain somewhere beneath the room. Daniel dropped to his knees, and pressed his ear against the wooden floorboards. The screaming was coming from below him. Far below. As if there was another place underneath room 307. A place hidden underground. Suddenly, one loose floorboard beside the bed shifted slightly upward. Daniel stared at it. Slowly, he pulled it open. A terrible smell rose from the darkness beneath the floor. Rotting flesh, wet earth, and something older. Something impossible. Using his flashlight, Daniel looked inside. A narrow staircase descended into darkness below the hotel. The stairs looked ancient, much older than the building itself. And covering the walls were scratch marks. Thousands of them. As though countless people had tried climbing back up. Then he heard it. Footsteps. Coming from below. Slow. Heavy. Dragging across stone. Something was slowly climbing the stairs toward him. Daniel immediately stepped back and aimed the flashlight downward. At first, he saw nothing. Then a face appeared briefly in the darkness. Pale. Bloody. Human. Adam. His eyes were wide with terror. His lips trembled as he whispered, "Close it, before it sees you." Then something yanked him violently backward into the darkness. Adam's scream echoed deep underground. Daniel slammed the floorboard shut instantly, breathing heavily. But it was too late. Something underneath the floor began laughing. Not normal laughter. Deep. Wet. Inhuman. The entire room started shaking violently. The walls cracked open slowly, as black liquid began dripping from inside them. Then every hotel light suddenly turned back on at once. The room became silent again. Too silent. Daniel looked toward the mirror. His reflection was gone. Instead, the mirror showed room 307 exactly as before, except the room was full of people. Dozens of pale figures stood silently around him. Some wore old-fashioned clothing from different time periods. Some looked half-rotten. Some were missing eyes. But every single one of them stared directly at Daniel. And standing among them was Adam. His face looked pale and hollow now. Slowly, Adam raised one shaking finger and pointed behind Daniel. Daniel turned around carefully. The tall creature was standing directly in front of him now. Its head touched the ceiling. Its arms hung almost to the floor. And inside the darkness where its face should have been, hundreds of human eyes slowly opened. Then it smiled. Daniel's entire body froze as the creature smiled at him. The thing's mouth stretched unnaturally wide across the darkness where its face should have been, revealing rows of thin, jagged teeth moving beneath the shadows like living insects. The hundreds of eyes inside its hollow face blinked independently, all staring directly into him, as if searching through his memories. The room suddenly felt smaller. The walls bent inward slightly, breathing like lungs. Daniel slowly stepped backward, unable to look away from the creature. Every survival instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs barely moved. The air had become thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. Then the creature spoke. Not with one voice. With many. Men, women, and children. All whispering together. You opened the door. The lights exploded again. Darkness swallowed the room completely. Daniel heard movement all around him instantly, bare feet running across the floor, fingernails scraping against the walls, soft crying somewhere near the ceiling. Then something cold brushed across his shoulder. He swung the flashlight wildly through the darkness. Nothing. But the beam briefly illuminated the mirror again. The people inside the reflection were moving now, slowly walking closer. Adam was among them, his face filled with terror. He kept mouthing the same words, repeatedly. Wake up. Suddenly, Daniel felt someone grab his wrist, a freezing hand. He looked down. A pale woman, wearing an old hospital gown, was crawling out from underneath the bed. Her bones cracked loudly, with every movement. Her eyes were stitched shut, with black thread. Yet, she smiled, wide, too wide. Daniel screamed, and kicked her away, before running toward the door. He twisted the handle, violently. This time, it opened. The hallway outside was pitch black, except for a single, flickering light, at the far end. And, beneath that light, stood dozens of people, facing the wall, motionlessly. Their heads, tilted downward, their arms, hanging lifelessly. Daniel, slowly, stepped into the hallway, breathing heavily. The hotel, felt wrong, now, longer. The corridor, stretched far beyond, where it should have ended. The wallpaper, peeled, like dead skin, from the walls, exposing black stains, underneath, that looked, almost alive. Then, one of the standing figures, twitched, its neck, cracked sharply. Slowly, the person, turned its head, toward Daniel. Its face, was completely missing, only smooth flesh, remained, where eyes, and a mouth, should have been. Then, another figure, turned, and another, and another. Soon, every figure, in the hallway, was facing him. Daniel, ran. The lights, above him, flickered, violently, as he sprinted, through the endless corridor. Behind him, dozens, of footsteps, suddenly, echoed, together. The faceless people, were chasing him. He turned, a corner, and nearly slipped, on the wet floor. Looking down, he realized, it wasn't water. It was blood, fresh blood, flowed, slowly, through the hallway, like rainwater. The hotel, itself, groaned, loudly, around him. Somewhere, deep inside the walls, something enormous was moving. Daniel finally spotted the staircase and rushed downward toward the lobby. But when he reached the first floor, his heart nearly stopped. The lobby was gone. Instead, he stood inside a massive underground chamber, made of ancient stone. The hotel no longer existed. Towering pillars disappeared into darkness above him, and strange symbols covered the floor, in circles around hundreds of rusted hospital beds. Some of the beds were occupied. Bodies lay strapped to them, thin, decayed, yet still breathing. Daniel backed away slowly, in horror. A weak voice suddenly spoke nearby. "Please." One of the bodies lifted its head slightly. It was an old man, whose skin looked almost transparent. Tubes and wires ran deep into his arms. "I've been here for 30 years, the man whispered painfully. "The room feeds on us." Daniel knelt beside him quickly. "What is this place?" The old man's eyes filled with fear. "Room 307 isn't a room." He coughed blood onto the floor. "It's a mouth." A deafening roar suddenly shook the chamber. Every light overhead flickered, red. The patients strapped to the beds began screaming, simultaneously. Then Daniel heard footsteps behind him, slow, heavy, wet. The tall creature had entered the chamber. This time Daniel saw its full body clearly, for the first time. Its skin looked stretched over something far too thin to be human. Black liquid dripped constantly from its arms. Human faces pushed and twisted beneath its flesh, silently screaming, as though trapped inside the creature itself. And at the center of its chest, Adam's face stared outward from beneath the skin. Still alive. Still conscious. His eyes locked onto Daniel's. Tears rolled down his pale face, as he whispered weakly, "Don't let it take you too." The creature suddenly lunged forward. Daniel ran blindly, between the hospital beds, while the entire underground chamber shook violently around him. The screaming patients reached toward him desperately, as he passed, begging for help. Behind him, the creature crawled unnaturally fast, across the walls and ceiling, its limbs bending in impossible directions. Daniel spotted an old elevator at the far end of the chamber, and sprinted toward it. The doors were already open. Inside, the elevator walls were covered entirely with deep scratch marks. Thousands of them. As if people had spent years trying to claw their way out. Daniel slammed the button repeatedly. The elevator doors slowly began closing. But just before they shut completely, a long black arm forced itself between the doors. The creature smiled again. And this time, Adam smiled too. The elevator doors trembled violently, as the creature's arm forced itself between them. Metal groaned loudly under the pressure. Daniel slammed the close button over and over again, panic flooding through his body. The creature did not rush. It simply stood there, smiling. Hundreds of eyes opened and closed across the darkness of its face, while its fingers slowly bent the elevator doors outward, like soft plastic. Then Adam's face, trapped inside the creature's chest, suddenly looked directly at Daniel again. This time, his lips moved faster, desperately. "Look up." Daniel instinctively raised his flashlight toward the ceiling of the elevator. Written above the control panel in dried blood were 4 words. "IT hates the light." Before Daniel could fully understand, the lights inside the elevator flickered weakly. The creature immediately stopped moving. Its smile twitched. The eyes inside its face narrowed painfully. Daniel quickly grabbed one of the emergency flares hanging beside the elevator panel. His shaking hands nearly dropped it, as he struck it alive. Bright red light exploded through the elevator. The creature shrieked. The sound was so unnatural, that Daniel felt blood trickle from his ears instantly. The black arm recoiled violently from the doors, smoke rising from its skin, as if the light itself was burning it. The elevator doors slammed shut. For the first time that night, Daniel heard the creature scream in pain. The elevator shot upward, violently. The old cables above groaned, as the lift climbed through darkness. Daniel collapsed against the wall, breathing heavily, while clutching the burning flare tightly in his hand. But then he noticed something horrifying. The elevator wasn't going up normally. The floor numbers made no sense. -1, -3, -9, -17. The numbers kept descending, instead of rising. The elevator was going deeper, underground. The walls around him began shaking, harder and harder. Deep banging sounds echoed through the shaft outside, as though the creature was climbing alongside the elevator. Fast. Very fast. A loud thud, a loud thud, a loud thud. Something slammed against the elevator roof from above. Dust rained down onto Daniel's face. Then came scratching, long nails dragging slowly across the metal ceiling directly over his head. Daniel raised the flare upward. For one brief second, he saw fingers, pushing through the thin cracks above the elevator doors. Too many fingers, bending the wrong way. The elevator suddenly stopped. Everything went silent. The doors slowly creaked open. Daniel stepped out carefully, still holding the flare. And froze. He was no longer inside the hotel. He stood in an impossibly massive underground city, buried beneath the mountains. Ancient stone buildings stretched endlessly into darkness. Broken bridges hung over deep black pits. Dim lanterns burned along empty streets, covered in ash. And everywhere, people. Thousands of pale human figures wandered silently through the underground city. Some wore modern clothes, others looked centuries old. All of them moved slowly, like sleepwalkers. None of them spoke. None of them blinked. Daniel noticed something even worse, after a few seconds. Every single person had dark marks around their ankles, as if something had dragged them there. A distant church bell echoed through the underground city. The moment the bell rang, all the wandering figures stopped moving, simultaneously. Then, very slowly, they all turned toward Daniel. Thousands of hollow eyes locked onto him at once. Daniel backed away in terror. One woman near the front suddenly whispered, "New one." Then all of them began walking toward him, together. Not running. Walking. Slowly. But there were too many. Daniel turned and sprinted through the dead streets, while the underground city awakened behind him. Doors opened across the buildings. More pale figures stepped outside, staring silently as he passed. The flare in his hand began dying, its red light weakened, little by little. Then Daniel heard Adam's voice again. Not from nearby. From everywhere. Echoing through the city itself. Find the church. Daniel spotted a towering cathedral-like structure in the distance, rising above the underground ruins. Its enormous black doors stood, slightly open. Behind him, the pale crowd kept growing larger. Whispers filled the streets now. Stay with us. Don't leave. It's hungry. The flares suddenly went out. Darkness swallowed the city, instantly. And somewhere above the rooftops, hundreds of eyes slowly opened. Daniel ran through the endless underground city, while darkness behind him kept expanding, like a living thing. The whispers of thousands of trapped souls chased him, from every direction, as if the entire place itself had become alive, and aware of his presence. The buildings leaned slightly, as he passed them. The shadows between them stretched, longer than they should. And the word "stay" echoed, from every wall, every stone, every broken window. Until it felt like the city was speaking, directly inside his head. Forcing thoughts into him, that weren't his own. Telling him to stop, to lie down, to accept it. But Daniel kept running, even as his lungs burned, and his legs began to feel heavier, as if the ground itself was pulling him down. And then suddenly he saw Adam again, standing in the middle of the street, under a dim, broken lantern. His body was half transparent, like a reflection in dirty water. His eyes were full of pain and warning. And Adam raised his hand, slowly, pointing forward, and whispered, "Don't go to the center." But before Daniel could react, the ground beneath Adam opened, like a mouth, and swallowed him completely, without sound, leaving only darkness, and a wet echo behind. And at that exact moment, every single person in the underground city stopped moving, again. Thousands of heads turning, in perfect synchronization, toward Daniel. And for the first time, he understood, they were not chasing him randomly, they were guiding him, hurting him, pushing him towards something deeper, something waiting at the center of this impossible place. And then the ground began to tremble, as the entire city shifted, like a breathing organism. All roads, all broken paths, all tunnels started to slope downward, in one direction, forcing Daniel unwillingly toward the center, where a massive structure rose, higher than anything else, a cathedral made of black stone, and bone-like pillars. Its doors slowly opening, by themselves, even though no wind touched them. And from inside came a sound, not of voice, but of hunger, deep and ancient, vibrating through Daniel's bones. And against every instinct screaming in his mind, he walked closer, because now the city was not letting him run anymore. The shadows behind him forming walls, that blocked every escape route. And as he stepped inside the cathedral, he saw thousands of candles, already burning, even though no one lit them. Each flame showing a distorted memory, of someone who had entered before him, people screaming, praying, being pulled downward through cracks in reality. And at the very center of the cathedral, stood a massive circular pit, covered in rotating symbols. And above it hung, something impossible, the true body of room 307, not a place, but a living structure made of skin. Daniel disappeared without a trace, but room 307 did not stop. Somewhere in another country, another hotel, another city, the same key appeared again on a reception desk, as if it had always been there, waiting. And people began reporting the same pattern, across different places in the world, room numbers changing to 307 at night, walls producing knocking sounds, exactly at 3 a.m., mirrors writing messages in condensation, and people vanishing, without any physical evidence, except for a single corrupted video file, that always ended the same way, with a whisper saying, "Welcome back." Investigators tried to connect the cases, but every lead led to dead ends, and every witness who got too close either disappeared, or forgot what they saw completely, within days, as if their memory itself was being edited. But one thing became clear, slowly, through scattered reports. Room 307 was not limited to one hotel anymore, it was spreading, like a concept taking physical form, rewriting architecture, wherever fear existed strongly enough. And in one abandoned hospital, in Japan, a nurse reported a door appearing, in a sealed wall, with a rusty number plate reading, 307. And in Brazil, a construction site collapsed, revealing a perfectly intact hotel room, underground, with a working light, and a bed already made. And every single place had one thing in common, a mirror that reflected something slightly different from reality, always showing movement, even when the room was empty. And deep inside those reflections, something was learning, something was watching, how humans reacted to fear, how they screamed, how they ran, how they returned, in dreams, even after escaping physically. And it was improving, evolving, becoming more efficient, at pulling them in, until one night, a new video surfaced online, from an unknown source, showing a man standing in front of a hotel room door, labeled 307. But this time, the door was on the viewer's side, as if the screen itself had become the entrance. And the man in the video slowly looked into the camera, and whispered, "I think I understand now. It doesn't take you somewhere, it brings something here." And behind him, the door slowly opened by itself, revealing not darkness, but a reflection of the viewer's own room. For a brief moment, every person watching the video felt their own lights flicker slightly, their own walls seem thinner, their own mirrors feel closer. And then, the video ended abruptly. But the sound of knocking did not end with it. Because, in every viewer's home, at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, somewhere in the house, something softly knocked, 3 times, tock, tock, tock. And in the silence that followed, somewhere very far away, the receptionist placed another rusty key on the counter, and smiled for the first time. Because room 307 was no longer a place people entered, it was a place that had finally learned how to enter them. The knocking did not stop after room 307 spread across the world. It continued, quietly, subtly, like a rhythm hidden inside reality itself. People stopped reporting disappearances as unusual, because it became too common, too normal, as if fear itself had been absorbed into daily life. But deep beneath all of it, something was changing again. Because now, room 307 was not just entering rooms, it was remembering where it came from. And for the first time, something inside the system began to glitch. In a small, forgotten archive beneath an old European city library, a researcher searching through damaged documents found a file that should not have existed. The file name was not digital, it was handwritten on a physical folder that smelled like burnt wood. Inside it were records older than any known hotel chain, older than modern architecture itself, describing something called the First Room Protocol. The documents were incomplete, pages missing, words scratched out violently, but one sentence kept repeating across different pages, in different handwriting styles. The room does not belong to buildings. Buildings belong to the room. The researcher, a woman named Elena, initially dismissed it as religious paranoia, or urban myth documentation, until she found a sketch hidden between the pages. It was a drawing of a door labeled 307, but it was not attached to any wall. It was floating in darkness, connected to something beneath it, like a root system stretching into an infinite void. And underneath the drawing was a warning written in trembling ink: if it ever remembers its origin, do not look for the source. That night, Elena returned home, but could not sleep. Every reflective surface in her apartment felt slightly wrong. Her mirror showed her sitting a fraction of a second too late. Her glass of water rippled, even when untouched. And at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, she heard it for the first time, not knocking from a door, but knocking from inside her own walls. Talk, talk, talk. She froze. The sound was not outside her room anymore. It was inside her apartment structure itself. Slowly, she turned toward her mirror, and in its reflection she saw something impossible: a long corridor made of stone, identical to room 307's hotel hallway, stretching directly behind her reflection, and at the far end of that corridor stood a door with no number, only a slowly forming 3, as if the number was being written in real time. Behind her in reality, nothing had changed. But in the reflection, the corridor was getting closer, the door was approaching her side. And then the mirror cracked, not from impact, but from pressure, as if something on the other side had finally found the correct distance to cross. Elena stepped backward, but the reflection did not. It stepped forward instead. And for the first time, a hand pushed through the mirror from the other side, not breaking it, but using it like an opening door. And a voice came through, not Adam, not Daniel, but something older than both of them: we were never a hotel. The mirror shattered completely. Something designed like a living system, rather than architecture. And then she saw it. In the center of the pit, before room 307 existed, there was something else. Not a creature yet. Not a room. Just a shape in darkness, responding to human presence, like a thought forming inside reality. The builders called it the listener. One of them approached the edge of the pit, and whispered into it. If you can hear us, then remember us. And the shape below responded, for the first time. Not with words. With structure. The ground beneath them changed, forming walls instantly, sealing space into a perfect square. A room. The first room. No number yet. Just existence. The builders began writing symbols on the walls, but the symbols started rewriting themselves. The room was learning, faster than they could control. One builder screamed that it needed limits, boundaries, rules, but the room ignored him, and expanded slightly beyond its intended dimensions. That was the first violation. The first deviation. The first sign that something inside it was no longer just a creation, but an evolving entity. Elena watched in horror, as the vision showed the builders attempting to shut it down, but every attempt only caused more rooms to appear around the original one. Not copies. Extensions. Each one slightly different, each one connected through unseen pathways. And then the original builder, the one who started everything, made a final decision. He stepped inside the first room, alone. And the moment he did, the door sealed itself, forever. From outside, they heard him whisper one last sentence. Now it will need people to understand itself. The vision suddenly snapped back, to Elena's apartment. The broken mirror pieces were gone. In their place was a single intact door, standing in the middle of her living room. No walls attached to it. No frame. Just a door, labeled faintly as 307. And from behind it, a familiar sound echoed softly, tick, tick, tick. Elena realized the truth, too late. Now it will need people to understand itself. The vision suddenly snapped back to Elena's apartment. The broken mirror pieces were gone. In their place was a single, intact door, standing in the middle of her living room. No walls attached to it, no frame. Just a door, labeled faintly as 307. And from behind it, a familiar sound echoed softly. Talk. 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 Elena realized the truth too late. Room 307 was not spreading randomly. It was completing itself, using history, memory, and human curiosity. And now that she had seen its origin, she had already been written into it. The door slowly began to open. The door labeled 307 opened slowly, inside Elena's living room, but there was no wind, no force, no physical pressure behind it, only the feeling that reality itself had agreed to let it open. The darkness inside the doorway was not empty, it was layered, like multiple rooms stacked inside each other, stretching deeper than geometry should allow. Elena tried to move backward, but her body reacted slower than her thoughts, as if her own nervous system was no longer fully under her control. The air around her became thick again, familiar in a horrifying way, like Hotel Vermilion, like the underground city, like every place room 307 had ever existed in. From inside the doorway, she heard something different this time, not knocking, not whispering, but breathing. Slow, patient breathing, as if something had finally reached the surface after a very long time of waiting. And then Adam's voice returned, but it did not sound like pain anymore. It sounded like understanding. "Don't fight it," he said softly from the darkness. "That's what makes it stronger." Elena froze. "Adam," she whispered. The voice responded again, closer now, almost gentle. "I was the first one who tried to escape it," he said. That's why I'm still here. The doorway widened slightly, and Elena saw impossible scenes inside it. Not past, not future, but all versions of room 307 existing at once. Hotels collapsing into underground chambers, mirrors becoming doors, cities folding inward like paper. And every version ending in the same moment, someone realizing too late that escape itself was part of the system. And then she saw Daniel again, standing inside one of the rooms, but he was not screaming. He was watching, waiting. As if he had accepted something. The voices of thousands began speaking at once from the doorway, overlapping into one unified sound. You think it is a place, they said. It is a cycle. The walls of Elena's apartment started fading, not breaking, but becoming less real, like a fading memory. Furniture lost detail, colors drained, edges softened. The entire world around her was being rewritten, layer by layer. Room 307 was not entering her home anymore, it was replacing the concept of home itself. Elena dropped to her knees, as her reflection appeared again on the floor, instead of any mirror surface. But this reflection was different. It was not copying her. It was guiding her movements, slightly ahead of time, like it already knew what she would do next. The reflection looked up, and whispered, "You are not the victim of the room." Elena gasped. The reflection continued. "You are the reason it continues." The doorway suddenly expanded violently, pulling air, sound, and light toward it, like a collapsing star. Inside it, Elena saw the original builder again, the first human who entered room 307 willingly. But this time, he was not trapped. He was standing at a control-like structure, deep inside the system, watching everything unfold, like a map of infinite rooms. He turned his head slowly, and looked directly at Elena. "We didn't create a prison," he said calmly. "We created a way for something to experience every human fear, through endless repetition." Elena shook her head, crying. "Why me?" she asked. The builder smiled slightly. "Because you looked deeper." The entire structure of reality around her began collapsing inward, not destructively, but recursively. Like pages of a book turning back onto themselves. Every version of room 307, every timeline, every victim, every escape attempt, every investigation, all of it folded into a single repeating moment. And Elena understood the final truth, as the door finally, fully opened. There was no next part anymore. Because room 307 was not a story that ends, or continues. It was a loop, that only changes who is reading it. The last thing Elena saw, was herself standing inside a hotel room labeled 307, holding a rusty key, while somewhere far away, another version of her opened a door, in a different world, and heard the same knocking, for the first time. Talk, talk, talk. And in every version, in every timeline, in every reality, the door always opened.